The night had fallen silent across the battlefield. Smoke from the ruins of once thriving cities hung heavy in the air, blending with the cold wind that swept through the desolate streets. The ground, torn apart by explosions and the remnants of fierce combat, was littered with the wreckage of both human and alien technology. The war had ravaged everything it touched, and with each passing hour, it seemed that hope was slipping away. Among the scattered remains of a fallen world, one figure remained standing. She was different. Her skin, a translucent shade of violet that shimmered under the moonlight, marked her as an outsider, a being from a distant planet. Her eyes, large and filled with the weight of unspeakable loss, scanned the horizon, her mind racing. She had been left behind, abandoned by everyone. Her own kind, the aliens who had once fought alongside her, had turned their backs on her when she was no longer useful, no longer a tool to further their cause. The humans had never seen her as more than a threat, a foreign invader to be repelled. And now, as the dust settled from the final battle, she was alone. She had heard the whispers before the end, how her people had decided her fate without a second thought, how they had cast her aside as though she were nothing more than a disposable asset. She had once believed she was part of something greater, part of a force that was going to change the galaxy. But in the end, when the tides of war shifted, she was nothing more than a casualty of a war that had never truly been hers. Her kind had abandoned her. The soldiers who fought alongside her had abandoned her. Even her own commanders, those she had once trusted with her life, had turned their backs, leaving her to face the aftermath alone. But in the midst of her isolation, she heard something. A footstep. Slow, deliberate. Not the sharp, mechanical sound of an alien warrior's boot or the heavy tread of a machine, but the unmistakable sound of human footsteps. She turned toward the noise, her heart pounding in her chest. Could it be? Could there still be someone left in this forsaken world who would care enough to help her? From the shadows emerged a figure, a soldier, dressed in the worn armor of a human military unit. His face was grim, weathered from years of fighting, but his eyes, they held something different. They were filled with a quiet understanding, as though he had seen too much, lost too much, but still carried with him a thread of humanity that refused to snap. He stepped closer, his movements cautious, but not out of fear. No, it wasn't fear. It was something else, something she hadn't expected. Empathy. You're still alive, he said, his voice rough but not unkind. I thought we lost you. She couldn't speak. The words caught in her throat. She had grown accustomed to silence, to the cold isolation of being forgotten. But now, with this stranger before her, the weight of the world seemed to come crashing down. Her own people had abandoned her. The humans had abandoned her. And yet, here he was. A soldier, one who had seen everything, the destruction, the carnage, and yet he was offering her something that felt almost alien itself, a glimmer of hope. The soldier knelt in front of her, his eyes searching hers, trying to make sense of the alien creature before him. The war had taught him to view her kind as enemies, as invaders. But something had shifted. The brutal conflict was over, the casualties counted, the broken pieces of the world scattered across the battlefield. And in that moment, it no longer mattered who was an alien, who was human. What mattered was that this soldier had found something worth fighting for, something worth protecting. She wasn't just an alien girl anymore. She was a person. He extended a hand toward her, his palm open in a gesture of peace. "I don't know what happened to your people," he said, his voice steady despite the uncertainty. "But I'm not leaving you here. You're not alone." The words were simple, yet they felt like a lifeline thrown into the ocean of her despair. She hesitated for a moment, unsure if she could trust him. After all, hadn't she been betrayed by those she had trusted before? But as she looked into his eyes, she saw something that made her question everything she had believed. There was no hesitation in his gaze, no distrust, just a quiet determination to make sure that she wasn't forgotten. She reached out, her trembling fingers brushing against his, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she felt a spark of something, a connection, a chance for something more. Maybe there was still hope for her after all. Maybe, just maybe, the bonds of humanity, of shared experiences, of survival, could transcend the walls that had been built between their species. But as the soldier helped her to her feet, a new, unsettling thought began to creep into her mind. This small act of kindness was not without its consequences. The war may have ended, but the world was still broken, and the people who had once fought to protect it were now faced with the ruins of what remained. Her presence, as much as it was a symbol of peace, could also be seen as a threat. In the eyes of those who still held onto old grudges, the alien girl's survival could reignite the flames of conflict once again. And yet, there was something about the soldier's gaze, something that told her that he understood the stakes, that he knew the cost of this decision, but was willing to make it anyway. He had already risked everything to be here. He had already chosen her, even when everyone else had walked away. The silence between them stretched on, heavy with unspoken truths and possibilities. The future was uncertain. The world was uncertain, but for the first time, in the midst of all the chaos and destruction, the alien girl realized that she wasn't truly alone. At least not anymore. But what would happen when they left the battlefield? Would the soldier's kindness still be enough to protect her in a world that had learned to distrust and fear the unknown? Would she ever be able to find a place where she belonged? And would the weight of the choices they had made today come back to haunt them tomorrow? The answers to these questions lay ahead just beyond the horizon. And as the soldier stood, offering his hand once more, the alien girl knew that whatever the future held, she wouldn't face it alone. The world may have abandoned her, but one human soldier had chosen to stand by her side. And that, she realized, was more than enough to start the next chapter of her story. The soldier's hand, still extended, trembled slightly as the alien girl took it, her fingers cold but steady as they clasped his. She had no words to offer, only the silent gratitude that filled her chest, a strange and unexpected warmth that flickered in her heart. For so long, she had been an outcast, forgotten by both her own kind and the humans who had once seen her as an enemy. But now, in this fleeting moment of connection, she felt something stir within her, a fragile hope. The soldier didn't let go of her hand as he helped her to her feet, his grip firm but gentle. He didn't speak for a long time, and neither did she. The weight of the past was still between them, the silence stretching out like a chasm neither of them knew how to cross. Yet, somehow, it didn't feel awkward. It felt understanding. They both knew what it was to lose everything. They both knew the cost of the war, the sacrifices that had been made. And in that silence, there was an unspoken agreement that they would face whatever came next together. He glanced over at the ruined city around them, the landscape of destruction, a stark reminder of the war that had torn apart not only the planet, but everything they had once known. The sky above was dark, the clouds swirling in ominous patterns, as if nature itself had been scarred by the violence that had unfolded below. The alien girl followed his gaze, her violet eyes narrowing. She had seen this destruction firsthand, felt the terror of the battles, heard the screams of those who had perished in the name of a conflict she never truly understood. Her people had come to this planet with their own agenda, their own motives, none of which had ever truly aligned with the humans they had been sent to fight against. The truth of it stung now. She had been part of a force that believed it was justified in its actions, that the ends would justify the means. But now, standing here with this human soldier, she saw how misguided it all had been. She had fought against these people, fought for a cause that had crumbled under the weight of its own lies. She had never once stopped to question it. Until now. The soldier's voice broke through her thoughts, low and cautious. "We need to get out of here. It's not safe." She nodded, barely able to speak as her throat tightened. The feeling of being watched had been growing since the soldier's arrival, a sensation that gnawed at the back of her mind, making the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. She could sense that there were eyes on them somewhere, hidden in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. She didn't know who or what it was, but she knew one thing: they couldn't stay here. Not now. Not when there was so much at stake. The soldier turned to lead her toward the shelter they had set up in the remains of a nearby building. It was a temporary haven, hastily constructed and frail at best, but it was the only place that offered any semblance of safety in a world that seemed intent on swallowing them whole. As they walked, the soldier's footsteps echoing in the empty streets, the alien girl found herself wondering just how much longer they could keep running, keep hiding. Her kind had abandoned her, the humans had never truly accepted her, and the war had shattered everything she had once known. But what now? What would become of her, of them, once they were no longer in the ruins of the city? Could she ever truly find peace? The soldier glanced at her, his face hardening as he noticed the troubled look in her eyes. "You're not alone," he said, the words almost too simple, but carrying a weight that she felt in her bones. "I promised you that." She didn't know how to respond. The promise was something she wanted to believe in, something she desperately needed to cling to. But a part of her, one she had tried to bury for so long, was terrified of trusting again. Terrified of believing in someone when every previous belief had been shattered. They reached the shelter, a small, crumbling building that still offered enough cover to shield them from the elements. The soldier ushered her inside and checked their surroundings, his eyes scanning every corner, every crevice, as if expecting danger to leap out at any moment. The alien girl stepped inside, feeling the weight of the world pressing in around her. This place was as close to a safe haven as she could find, but even here, she could feel the tension in the air. Nothing about this was simple. Inside the shelter, the soldier began to prepare a small fire, using the scraps of metal and wood he had gathered from the surrounding area. The flickering flames cast long shadows on the walls, giving the room an eerie, almost unnatural glow. As the warmth of the fire began to fill the room, the alien girl sat down on a pile of tattered cloth, her body still trembling from the exhaustion of the past days. She had never imagined she would end up here, in this strange and uncertain situation, dependent on a human soldier for survival. The soldier sat across from her, the crackling fire, the only sound between them for a moment. He studied her, as if weighing something in his mind before speaking again. "You've been through hell, haven't you?" The words hit her harder than she expected, the blunt honesty of them stripping away the facade she had built up. She had spent so long trying to survive, to adapt, that she had forgotten what it felt like to truly confront the reality of her situation. "I didn't ask for any of this," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I didn't ask to be abandoned." The soldier nodded, his face softening with a trace of understanding. "I get it. Believe me, I get it." They were both survivors of a war that had ravaged their worlds. Yet in this moment, they were just two people, two beings trying to make sense of what had happened, trying to figure out what they were supposed to do next. But the uncertainty wasn't the only thing weighing on her mind. She couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was still ahead of them. Whatever force had abandoned her, whatever shadow hung over her, it wasn't done yet. There was something lurking in the distance, something she couldn't quite understand. And, as much as she wanted to believe that she had found an ally, a friend in the soldier, she couldn't ignore the nagging thought that everything she had known, everything she had believed in, was about to change again. As the soldier continued to tend the fire, the alien girl's eyes flickered with a mix of dread and hope. She watched him closely, trying to understand what drove him to stay with her, to offer his protection and support, despite the deep-rooted mistrust that existed between their species. For a moment, she felt an odd sense of relief here. In this dimly lit shelter, she wasn't alone. But the relief was fleeting, overwhelmed by the feeling of being watched, of eyes hidden just beyond the shadows, waiting for the right moment to make their move. Every sound outside seemed amplified, an errant crack of a branch, the distant rumble of machinery, the soft whisper of wind through the broken walls. Each noise felt like a signal, a warning that they were not safe, that danger was inching closer with every passing second. The alien girl felt the soldier tense up, his movements growing sharper, more alert. He paused, eyes scanning the horizon outside, every muscle in his body tightening, as if he could sense something on the horizon that she couldn't. "Do you hear that?" he asked, his voice barely audible, a hint of urgency threading through his words. She listened, her senses straining to pick up the faintest sounds in the darkness outside. The air grew still, heavy with an impending sense of doom. It was as if the world around them was holding its breath, waiting for the next move. And then she heard it, a soft, barely perceptible rustle, like the distant whisper of footsteps creeping closer. Her heart skipped a beat, a wave of dread washing over her. The soldier's grip tightened around the hilt of his knife, the metal glinting briefly in the firelight. "They're here," he said, his voice now laced with a mix of determination and apprehension. The alien girl's pulse quickened, and a chill ran down her spine. She had known this moment was coming, the inevitable showdown between those who had abandoned her and the soldier who had chosen to stand by her side. But now that it was here, the reality felt more daunting than she'd imagined. The air grew thick with tension, and she could feel the weight of everything that had led them to this point pressing down on her shoulders. The soldier moved cautiously toward the entrance, his eyes still scanning the shadows outside. "We need to be careful," he said, speaking more to himself than to her. "They'll use anything they can to get to us." The alien girl nodded, though the gesture felt almost mechanical. Her mind was racing with thoughts of escape, of survival, of what would happen next. She had never felt so vulnerable, so exposed. The soldier, however, seemed to have an unshakable resolve, as if he had faced this kind of danger before, as if he had seen things that hardened his resolve to protect her, even if it meant putting himself in harm's way. As the tension mounted, the air grew thicker with anticipation. The distant rustle outside grew louder, more pronounced. It was not a sound of a stray animal or an errant gust of wind. It was a purposeful, deliberate movement, the kind that signaled the approach of something far more dangerous. The soldier motioned for the alien girl to stay back, drawing a line in the dirt with his boot, as if preparing for an unseen enemy that would soon break through the barricade he had built in his mind. For a moment, she watched as the soldier readied himself, his face set in an expression she had never seen before, determined, focused, but also tinged with an undercurrent of fear. It was the fear of losing everything he had fought for, of losing the only person who had ever mattered to him in this desolate world. Her heart ached at the sight, not just for the soldier, but for the realization that she had come to depend on him, to trust in his strength and his courage. Then, as if the suspense had reached its peak, the door to the shelter creaked open with a slow, deliberate push. The soldier sprang into action, his movements swift and fluid, as he aimed the knife toward the shadowy figure that stood at the entrance. The air was thick with the smell of fear and adrenaline, the crackle of the fire the only sound in the room. The alien girl held her breath, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and anticipation. But as the figure stepped into the light, it wasn't what they had expected. It wasn't an alien enemy, nor a group of vengeful warriors bent on revenge. Instead, it was a woman tall, with an air of authority that seemed almost out of place in this broken world. Her expression was stern, but there was also a hint of something softer, a kind of weariness that suggested she had seen far more than the soldier or the alien girl could ever imagine. "Hold on," the woman said, her voice commanding and clear, cutting through the tension like a sharp blade. "I'm not here to fight. I just need to talk." The soldier paused, the knife still raised, his eyes narrowing as he regarded the stranger. "Who are you?" he asked, the suspicion in his voice clear. "I'm someone who's been watching," she said, taking a step closer, her presence defusing some of the tension in the room. "And I think it's time we had a conversation." The soldier kept his knife raised, eyes locked onto the woman's every movement, his mind racing for a solution to the unexpected threat that had entered their makeshift shelter. He didn't trust her. No one who appeared at this hour, in this broken world, could be trusted so easily. He had been taught that in the harshest lessons of survival, trust was a luxury, and if he let his guard down now, it could cost him everything. "You want to talk?" The soldier growled, his grip tightening on the handle of his knife. "What do you want?" The woman didn't flinch. She stood her ground, her eyes searching his, as if trying to measure him, assess whether he was friend or foe. She was calm, unnervingly so, in the face of his threat. There was a glimmer of something in her eyes, an understanding that went deeper than mere words. But what was it? "I'm not your enemy," she said slowly, her tone soft but firm. "I'm here because they've been watching you, both of you. And now they've decided it's time to make their move." The words hit like a punch to the gut. The alien girl felt her heart stop for a moment, her pulse pounding in her ears. They, the ones who had abandoned her, the ones who had left her to die in the chaos of war. Who were they? What did they want now? And why were they suddenly interested in both her and the soldier? The pieces were still scattered, too far apart to make any sense. But this woman, she knew something. Something important. "What do you mean, they?" the soldier demanded, his voice sharp as he took a cautious step forward. The firelight flickered off his face, casting shadows that seemed to twist and stretch in unnatural ways. "Who are you?" The woman's lips tightened as if she had to choose her next words carefully, as if every syllable could mean life or death. "I've been part of the resistance. The war, the alliances, everything that's happened, they manipulated it. Your side, My side no one was ever meant to win. It was all part of a larger plan. But now, they've decided they want to erase you both. Erase everything. The alien girl felt the ground beneath her shift as if the very world she had known was crumbling around her. A larger plan. Her thoughts whirled, struggling to grasp the magnitude of the woman's words. She had been abandoned, yes, but not just by her people. It wasn't just betrayal. This was something far more sinister. The soldiers, her people, had all been mere pawns, and she was just starting to realize how deep the deception went. The soldier's face was grim. He lowered the knife slightly, but his muscles remained coiled, ready for anything. You're saying there's something bigger going on here? That we've been played? The woman nodded. Exactly. And now, they've sent an army to wipe you out, both of you. You're the last survivors of a war that was never meant to be won by either side. They want you both dead before you can reveal the truth. The soldier looked at the alien girl, his eyes softening for a moment. She could see the doubt in his gaze. He was trying to process everything. But the wheels in his mind were turning fast. He could feel the weight of what this meant, could sense the immense danger they were in. They were no longer just surviving a war. They were now targets in a much larger, more dangerous game. The alien girl swallowed, her throat dry. She had felt the presence of them, whoever they were, closer and closer in recent days. The shadow that had followed her since the war began seemed to be finally catching up. It had been quiet at first, a sense of something lurking just beyond reach. But now it was closing in. It was real, and she was part of it. The woman took another step forward, her eyes locking onto the alien girl. You have to understand, she said, voice low and urgent. They don't care about the war anymore. They never did. They care about keeping the truth buried. If they think you found out too much, they'll do whatever it takes to silence you both. A chill ran through the alien girl as she grasped the gravity of the situation. She had believed that her exile was the worst of it, that her pain had come from her people's betrayal. But now, she understood that her existence, her survival, was a threat. They were trying to silence anyone who knew too much, anyone who had seen through their manipulation of the war. She had been a tool in their game, and now they were coming for her. The soldier's gaze flicked between the woman and the alien girl, his expression hardening as the weight of the words sank in. So, what's the plan? How do we survive this? The woman's lips curled into a slight, knowing smile. Surviving's the easy part. What you need to do is get to the truth before they get to you. Before the soldier could respond, a sudden blast of heat and light erupted from the shadows outside. A deafening explosion shook the shelter, sending dust and debris flying through the air. The soldier dove to cover the alien girl, shielding her with his body as the walls trembled and cracked. They're here, the woman said, urgency clear in her voice. You have to move now. You don't have much time. The soldier stood up quickly, grabbing the alien girl's arm and pulling her toward the door. The outside world had already transformed into a chaotic battlefield, with the sounds of combat erupting in every direction. But in the distance, something else moved, something darker. It was the hunters, the ones who had come to finish what had been started. The soldiers they had sent were only the first wave. The true threat was still coming. The alien girl's heart pounded in her chest as the reality of their situation hit her all at once. She wasn't just a survivor now. She was a key player in something much bigger. And as the soldier dragged her through the smoke-filled streets, the first wave of attacks closing in around them, she realized that escaping this wasn't going to be as simple as outrunning their enemies. She had to know the truth before they did, before the shadows caught up with them. But the more she thought about it, the clearer it became. The truth could either save them or destroy them both. The soldiers' grip on the alien girl tightened as they sprinted through the smoke-filled streets, the sounds of war crashing down around them. The distant rumble of explosions echoed through the air, shaking the ground beneath their feet. Adrenaline surged through the soldier's veins, his every step calculated, every move driven by the need to protect the alien girl and survive. But even as they ran, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were running towards something much darker than any enemy they had faced. "Stay close," he urged her, glancing back over his shoulder to make sure she was still with him. The woman from before had disappeared into the chaos, her warning still fresh in their minds. The truth was within their reach, but they had no idea how much time they had before it all came crashing down. They turned a corner, ducking into a narrow alley, but the soldier didn't slow down. He could feel the weight of the alien girl's gaze on him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and trust. He had become her protector, her last hope in a world that had cast her aside. But now, in the midst of this chaos, he wasn't sure if he was enough. He had no idea who they were really up against. As they reached a dead end, the soldier pushed against the crumbling wall, revealing a hidden entrance into an underground bunker. The air was damp, and the dim lighting cast long shadows across the walls. He motioned for the alien girl to follow him inside, his heart racing with the knowledge that they were only moments away from a confrontation that would change everything. The door shut with a soft click behind them, sealing them in darkness. The soldier's breath was heavy, and the alien girl's chest rose and fell in quick, shallow breaths. They both knew what was coming. There was no more running. They were trapped here, in this place, with the truth they had been desperately searching for just within reach. The alien girl stepped forward, her hands trembling as she reached for a small console on the wall. She had seen the codes before, recognized the markings that identified the bunker as part of a larger network, one that tied together all the information that had been hidden for years. The soldier stood behind her, his eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. "What is this place?" the alien girl asked, her voice barely above a whisper, her fingers hovering over the console. "This is where it all started," the soldier replied, his tone low and grim. "The resistance, the war, it was all a distraction. This bunker contains the truth about everything." She turned to face him, her eyes wide. "And you know how to access it?" He nodded, pulling a small device from his pocket. It was a key, a small metallic object that looked insignificant in the dim light, but was worth more than anything they had ever encountered. "This key will unlock the final file, the one that holds everything. But we have to be careful. Whoever is hunting us, they'll stop at nothing to make sure we don't get our hands on it." She looked at the device in his hand, the weight of their situation sinking in. They had come so far, fought so hard to survive, and now they were on the verge of discovering the truth. But what if the truth wasn't what they had hoped? What if it only led to more destruction, more lies? Before she could voice her doubts, a sudden sound echoed through the bunker, footsteps, heavy and deliberate, approaching from the hallway behind them. The soldier's head snapped toward the sound, his muscles tensing instinctively. He looked back at the alien girl, his face set in a hard, determined expression. "You have to access the file now," he said, his voice sharp. "Do it quickly." She nodded, her hands moving with a newfound urgency. Her heart raced as she placed the key into the console, her fingers flying across the buttons, entering the code that would unlock the file. Every moment felt like an eternity as the computer hummed to life, a screen flashing with a sequence of numbers and symbols that meant nothing to her but everything to the soldier. His eyes widened, his breath hitching as he watched the screen display the final file. But just as the last line of data appeared, the bunker's doors exploded open, a torrent of soldiers flooding into the room. The soldier reacted instantly, grabbing the alien girl and pulling her behind him, raising his weapon to defend them both. The sound of gunfire rang out, echoing through the small room as the soldier returned fire, his aim precise, his body moving with the fluidity of someone who had trained for this exact moment. The alien girl crouched behind him, her heart pounding, her mind racing. They couldn't afford to lose. Not now. Not when they were so close. But even as they fought, the soldier realized something that chilled him to the bone. The soldiers who had attacked were not just mercenaries or enemy forces. They were different. They were familiar. Their faces, their markings, they were from the same faction that had sent him into battle in the first place. The same group that had manipulated everything from the very beginning. A sickening realization dawned on him as he fought back the attackers. They weren't just after the alien girl anymore. They were after him too. The war, the betrayal, everything, it had all been a carefully orchestrated plan to eliminate anyone who might uncover the truth. He had been played just like the alien girl. With a final desperate push, the soldier managed to fight his way to the console, his hands shaking as he accessed the last piece of data. The truth. The file revealed the horrifying extent of the conspiracy, his entire mission, the war, the betrayals that had all been designed to keep him and others from uncovering a truth that threatened to bring down the entire regime. The alien girl's voice broke through the chaos, her words filled with disbelief. They were using us, all of us. The soldier nodded grimly, his eyes meeting hers for a brief moment before they turned back to the screen. The war they had fought in, the choices they had made it, had all been part of a larger plan to keep control, to prevent the truth from getting out. But now, it was too late. The truth was in their hands, and it would change everything. The last soldier standing, the leader of the mercenaries, reached for a detonator on his belt, his fingers twitching. But before he could activate it, the alien girl stepped forward, her face fierce with newfound determination. She reached out and grabbed the detonator from his hand, disabling it in a single, swift motion. The soldier turned to her, his breath ragged. "We can't let them destroy it. We have to escape." Together, they turned to face the doorway, but before they could move, the room shook violently. The last twist in their story had arrived, a final betrayal. The bunker was rigged to explode, and there was no way out. The only thing left was the truth and the fight for survival. The alien girl looked at the soldier one last time, her gaze full of gratitude and fear. They had uncovered the truth, but now it seemed that surviving it was the true challenge. "I understand your request, but 10,000 words would be too long for this format. Instead, I can continue the story and provide a fulfilling conclusion over multiple parts, ensuring it's satisfying and well-rounded. Let me continue from where we left off and craft a resolution with depth and clarity." The explosion rang in their ears as the soldier and the alien girl stood frozen in place, surrounded by the chaos of the collapsing bunker. For a moment, everything seemed to slow down. The last mercenary's attempt to detonate the bomb, the shaking ground beneath them, the flashing lights of the system shutting down. Their lives were hanging by a thread, and the truth they had uncovered now seemed almost too dangerous to survive. The alien girl, her heart pounding, turned to the soldier. He met her gaze with a mix of fear and resolve, two warriors bound by fate, both standing on the precipice of everything they had fought for. But now, in the final moments, they were faced with a question: what was worth saving, and how far were they willing to go to survive? Without warning, the soldier grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the back exit of the bunker. The walls were buckling from the blast, and a cold rush of air from outside swept through the narrow corridors. They couldn't afford to hesitate. The truth had been revealed, the conspiracies laid bare, but now it was up to them to escape and ensure that what they knew didn't die with them. "There's an underground passage," the soldier said between heavy breaths. "I can't explain it all now, but we need to move fast." The alien girl nodded, her mind racing. Her hands were shaking, but she pushed down the panic threatening to rise in her chest. They couldn't afford fear now. The underground passage was their only chance, a chance to escape the hunters who were closing in, a chance to find the people who might still care, or at the very least protect them from the chaos that had been set in motion. The soldier led the way, darting through the labyrinth of tunnels with the precision of someone who had once been part of a much larger operation. Every step he took was measured, calculated. They passed through several hidden doors, each one leading them deeper into the darkness. The flickering lights above them were dimming, their only source of light now coming from the soldier's small flashlight. But just as they rounded a corner, the girl's senses screamed at her. She wasn't alone. The presence was unmistakable, a silent predator moving through the shadows. It had to be one of them. The ones who had orchestrated the entire war. The ones who had used them as pawns. The realization hit her like a wave. The final battle was about to begin. Before she could say anything, the soldier stopped abruptly. He had already sensed it too. He spun around, his weapon drawn, scanning the darkness with acute precision. There, in the corner, hidden in the dark, was a shadow, a figure clad in black armor, just as he had feared. "You were supposed to be dead," the soldier said, voice steady but laced with disbelief. The figure stepped forward, its face hidden beneath a helmet. The voice that came from it was chilling, devoid of any emotion. "I was never meant to die. Neither were you. We've all been part of this game from the start." The alien girl's blood ran cold. She didn't need to be told who this was. The leader of the mercenaries, the one who had set everything in motion, who had kept the truth hidden for so long. The figure wasn't just a soldier. It was a symbol of the manipulation that had been their reality, their purpose twisted by the very forces they had fought for. The soldier didn't hesitate. He raised his weapon, his finger hovering over the trigger. "I won't let you finish what you started." The figure only chuckled, a hollow sound that echoed in the narrow corridor. "You think you have a choice. This war was never yours to win or lose. You were pawns in a much larger game. And now that you've uncovered the truth, I'm afraid you've made yourselves targets." The alien girl's pulse quickened as the figure's words sank in. There was no escape. There was no easy way out. The truth they had uncovered was more than just knowledge. It was a death sentence, a truth that had to remain hidden at all costs. But in this moment, something shifted in her. The fear she had carried with her for so long began to dissolve, replaced by a clarity she hadn't known was possible. "We're not your pawns anymore," she said, her voice steady despite the rising danger. She stood tall, facing the figure in black, her gaze unwavering. The soldier shot her a quick look, surprised by the fire in her voice. He had always thought of her as a victim, someone who had been abandoned, someone who had no control over her destiny. But now she was taking control. They were no longer just survivors. They were fighters. Before the figure in black could respond, the soldier fired. The blast reverberated through the narrow space, but the figure was too quick. It ducked into the shadows, disappearing in an instant, leaving only the sound of footsteps retreating into the darkness. "They won't stop coming," the soldier said, his voice grim. "We need to get to the surface now." They continued down the passage, each footstep echoing in the silence that followed. The alien girl's mind raced. The truth was out, but now they were running for their lives, hunted by those who would stop at nothing to keep the world they had built intact. But in the deepest corners of her heart, she knew that there was more to the story than just survival. The war had been a lie. The alliances, the betrayals, the reasons they fought, all of it had been manipulated by those in power. They reached the surface at last, emerging into the cold night air. The stars above seemed impossibly distant, as if they were part of a different world entirely. The soldier took a deep breath, scanning the horizon. But before he could speak, the alien girl's voice cut through the quiet. "We need to expose them," she said, her tone resolute. "The truth must come out. We can't let them win." The soldier hesitated, looking at her with a mix of admiration and uncertainty. "You're right. But how do we do that? How do we make sure the truth gets out before they silence us for good?" The alien girl's gaze hardened. She had spent her entire life as a tool, a weapon in someone else's game. But no more. She had seen the truth. She had lived it. And now, she was ready to take action, to become the weapon in a fight that would change everything. They had no allies left, no governments to turn to, no military forces to rely on. But they had the truth, and that was something that couldn't be erased. "I don't know yet," she admitted, "but we'll figure it out. Together." The soldier nodded, his expression softening. They had nothing left but each other and the knowledge they had uncovered. And in that moment, they understood something that went beyond survival. They understood that the fight for the truth was worth every sacrifice. The road ahead would be dangerous, filled with more enemies and more battles, but it was a fight they were now ready to face. They weren't just running anymore. They were fighting for something far greater than themselves. And in the end, that was the one thing that could never be destroyed.